And with that, I would now like to formally begin today's conference and introduce Grady Hedgespeth.
Hello, everyone. My name is Grady Hedgespeth. I am the Director of the Office of Economic Opportunity here at the Small Business Administration. Thank you for being with us. A little bit of housekeeping on our side. We usually have a monthly call with our Community Advantage lenders, and this is the first call where we are asking all of our mission lenders that participate in the Office of Economic Opportunity programs to participate in an OEO-wide call. So this will be more and going forward than just Community Advantage. There's also our microloan program and our intermediary lending pilot program, as well as Prime. For our coverage today, the most important announcement is that next week we will be releasing the long-anticipated top lenders in our OEO programs of the year for the fiscal year that just ended at the end of September. I know a number of you are interested in this. We had a tremendous year in both the Community Advantage program, exceeding the $100 million mark in loan originations, and an excellent year also in the microloan program. So we will be releasing that next week, and soon after that we will be releasing details about the first Jody Raskine Award for Mission Lender of the Year. Last year we gave the award to our top microlender, but this year, recognizing how all of our programs are being more and more integrated together by our lending participants, and with developments like the one that we're talking about today, which really cross both of our microlending and CA programs, we felt it appropriate to make the award in honor of Jody, something that she and I have been working on when, unfortunately, we lost her to cancer last year, and that was to make a seamless web of increasing capital opportunities for underserved businesses, starting as low as $500 and going up to $5 million. So stay tuned. You'll hear more about that. I am delighted today to spend the bulk of our time, the remainder of our time, in the second of a series of 3 webinars that we are sponsoring out of my office regarding lending to ex-offenders and thinking about the new rule that was passed that allows the microloan program to lend to parolees and probationers. It is the first capital access program at SBA that allows lending to this 4.5 million population. We are delighted and very privileged to have with us Greg Fairchild and Tierney Fairchild. Greg is the Bigelow Associate Professor at the University of Virginia's Darden School of Business, and Dr. Tierney Fairchild is the Executive Director of Resilience Education. Together they have become leading experts in the field of education programs for ex-offenders to improve their prospects in the job market and to reduce their recidivism in returning to prison. So with that and this second webinar, I'm going to turn it over, and I would like for you to please mark your calendars. The final one in this series will be on November 18th, and that will they'll talk a little bit more at the end of their presentation about that one. You might have had November 11th down earlier, but it is on November 18th. Thank you very much, and now I'll turn it over to the Fairchilds. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Grady, and thanks for everyone from the SBA to help pull this together. Thanks for all of you who've logged on. We are here to share with you the learning we've gained over the last few years and how one might think about serving, educating, engaging with ex-offenders. We're very excited about the decisions and the initiatives around lending to ex-offenders as they dovetail well with the work we've been doing. We had a session on September 30th, a month ago, where we talked about entrepreneurial reentry generally. Grady Hedgespeth has already spoken about that. We are doing today a discussion of what lessons we've learned on recruitment and selection. And then, as Grady mentioned, we'll be spending more time discussing designing and delivering content on the November the 18th. I'd like to go to slide 2 and then to slide 3 very quickly, please. So slide 2 shares again the dates for the sessions we just described. Slide 3 begins a conversation about reviewing the challenge. And I'm turning it over now to my partner, Tierney Fairchild.
Hi, everyone. It's Tierney here. If you remember, from those of you that were on, if you could advance to the data, Colin, we are in a situation where we've got over 1.5 million people incarcerated. You can see the breakdowns by ages, where you really think about the numbers of people that are actually employable, and the vast majority are in employable ages. But, you know, more importantly about the challenge, we are really almost 5 million people on probation or parole. And the release of ex-offenders, as you can see, is quite a large number across the United States. So these are people coming back into your communities every week. And so our challenge, and the challenge of the SBA, is for us to really look and figure out ways in which we can engage, employ, and help people be most successful in their reentry. If you can advance to that final part of this slide, you'll see that, you know, we need to keep in mind that 90% of people that are currently incarcerated will be released. And in fact, you know, the other very hard thing for us to swallow is that if we don't begin these greater interventions, that what we find is 2/3 are going to be rearrested within 3 years. Those are two pretty staggering statistics, and I think as we go through this webinar, we want to keep those in mind. If we can advance to slide 4. Here I have a question for you, for those of you that were paying attention last month. This is a poll, and we'd like to engage everybody in this poll. Earlier this month, President Obama announced that he would release how many nonviolent federal ex-offenders by the end of this month. Your choices are A, 500, B, 12,000, C, 2,000, D, 6,000, or E, 25,000. If you could use your entry buttons to respond and reply, we'll get a sense of where we are in this poll, and I'll ask Colin to step back in and help us get a sense of where everyone is.
And Tierney, looks like the popular answer is E.
25,000. Well, the correct answer is, in fact, D, 6,000. For those of you that likely there are probably going to be other releases, and there may be releases going on in your own states, but the announcement by President Obama was that 6,000 nonviolent federal ex-offenders would be released, and these were largely related to drug offenses. And I think this has been a reaction to some of the sentencing, the long sentencing that we have seen over the years since the war on drugs. And so President Obama's, at the end of this month and next month, I believe those 6,000 selected ex-offenders will be released. So these, again, people coming into your community. So if we advance to slide 5, you'll see another question, and this is really a question of opinions that we'd love your commentary on. So what do you think is the most important action that the Bureau of Prisons can take in preparing these people for release? And by these people, I mean these 6,000 ex-offenders, because these are in federal custody, and therefore they are part of the Bureau of Prisons. A, do you think we should help them build a resume? B, teach them financial literacy? C, ensure that they have places to stay? D, help them answer, quote unquote, the question, which those of you on the last webinar will remember? Or E, all of the above? And Colin, I'm going to look to you to assist us in this second poll, and then we'll move on to some more of the meat of this conversation.
It looks like we do already have quite a few responses, and the overwhelming majority seem to say that it is E, all of the above.
Well, in fact, there's no one right answer, and therefore I probably would have chosen E, all of the above, too. This is, you know, the essential elements of employability, as we know, is, you know, having a safe and secure environment. You need a place to stay. You need a resume. The types of things that people that learn in financial literacy, becoming financially stable, learning how to navigate the financial products and banking system is very important. And, of course, helping them answer the question that is, the question being, how do you discuss your felony upon release so that you can be successful about getting a new start? And that is one of the most important things that these ex-offenders often face and have difficulty with as they re-enter our communities and the job market. Well, we'll move on to slide 6 right now, and I'm going to turn it back over to Greg for a discussion of this transition.
So the conversation that we should be thinking about is how will we assist these 10,000 per week back into our communities, and if we could assist them, well, what sort of things would we be thinking about across a range? The things I'm going to talk about now can't be done by any single organization, but could be done by partners, for those of you on the phone. And there are likely organizations in your community right now that are doing some of these things. And, in fact, the collection of organizations in your community may be doing all of these things. So it's contingent on you to begin to learn about who serves ex-offenders and what types of services they provide. Let's talk a little bit about what those services are. First of all, in transitioning, one of the most important is recognizing the importance of attaching to a community, and that community being, we can think of it geographically, we can think of it in terms of other types of affinities, family, religion, other types of nonprofit organizations, but in short, people need people. And on returning, even after a short stay, there'll be some feelings of difference. There'll be some feelings of disconnection. For those who have been in for a decade or longer, individuals might have a lack of real affinity or real connection, with not only people that had been in their lives, but they will find the communities that they lived in before physically look different, are laid out differently, and may not have lots of resonance with the world they were in before. So an important thing to think about in transitioning is how someone will connect and who someone will connect with. Next is stable housing. We say stable housing because finding a place to live, particularly if one has family that have moved or does not have family in a community, particularly since one might have to put down money that would involve getting a lease, stable housing will be a challenge. What we know is that many ex-offenders do live with friends or family, but yet these stays are short. They fall in and out of, for lack of a better word, comfort and love with people in their family and friendship group, and housing is very difficult. There are halfway houses. Now, but the number of halfway houses and the capacity that they have to take people are far below the numbers of people that are released. One of the things we know from our work is that actually women represent about 7 to 8% of all ex-offenders, but women's halfway houses are actually very difficult to come by. So, for example, in our Virginia community, a woman who is being released has a much harder chance of finding a place where she might stay temporarily while she gets her feet on the ground than a man coming out at the same time. Another challenge will be transportations and driver's licenses. Now, in communities where there is not a substantial mass transit system, the ability to get from point A to point B will largely be constrained by the ability of someone to deliver someone to point A or point B, the cost of a taxi, or the ability of someone to get their own driver's license and automobile. One of the challenges in a number of states is that if the ex-offender has an indebtedness to the state, which could be highly likely since many times ex-offenders have cost of court that they must pay. If they have an indebtedness to the state will not issue a driver's license until that indebtedness is cleared. These indebtedness can sometimes reach into 4 or even 5 figures. A next challenge, and these challenges that we're mentioning, in the absence of these challenges, there is a greater and greater risk of an ex-offender recidivating and returning to prison. The next of these is employment. Studies show a very large and pernicious effect of having been incarcerated in the effort to find entry-level work in companies after release. There are a set of studies we talked about in the last webinar done in Boston using testers, individuals posing as those that are incarcerated and those that aren't, and those studies show huge effects to the tune of about a third difference between someone being able to locate what could be a very, again, low-skill labor job in the presence of a past felony. Education. If someone's been incarcerated for a good bit of time, even if they were highly educated or at least educated at an entry level before going in, their educational skills may be out of date. What we also know is many ex-offenders enter without substantial education, and so in some cases we're talking remedial efforts. There's also the reality of time and technological shifts. I'd like everybody on the webinar to think for a minute about what has happened in the technology around something as common as a consumer product as a cell phone, and how that has changed over, say, the last 8 years. What a cell phone could do 8 years ago relative to what a cell phone can do now, and just the reality that someone would have been absent from that single change over that time may make a big difference in how one would search for a job, how one would navigate the community they're in, how they'd stay connected, how they get their information. We know that many individuals coming out of prison worry about talking about their felonies. We know that many have post-traumatic stress from having had that experience. We know that many women ex-offenders have been past victims of domestic violence. And we know that some individuals have mental health issues that have been untreated during their time. And so the ability, even in the instance someone is able to get a driver's license, able to get a job, has the educational skills, they may be suffering silently, either socially by being cut off or psychologically. And these things may all influence the ability of an individual to successfully transition out of prison. Next slide, please. So our next conversation is about the value of education and why education matters. There are two studies we'd like to talk about. The first of these is one that happened in 2010. And that 2010 study is from the Center for Economic Policy Research. That study looked at whether education had an influence on whether working-age ex-offenders would have a better chance of getting jobs, and actually calculated the cost to society of the ex-offenders, about 12 to 14 million of them, not being employed. That cost was about $65 billion in GDP on an annual basis. So when we think about these, then that for instance, frames for us the lost cost of productivity to society, and we should add the cost that someone might recidivate and return to prison, that this is an expensive proposition. What followed this study was one in 2013 by the RAND Corporation looking at correctional education specifically. And education programs are shown to lower the risk of recidivism by almost half, 43%. And they increase specifically the chances of employment by about 1/7, 13%. So these are both, when you think of the 57 to 65 billion in GDP cost alone, education turns out to be a solid and, frankly, worthwhile investment for society. Next slide. So now that we've talked about education, our model, our conversation with you is about the combining of education with the reason all of you are on the phone, the thought about business owners and their ability to be able to support debt capital or other forms of assistance that you might give them. I want to focus the next part of the discussion specifically on credit worthiness using a very simple credit scoring rubric, the 5 Cs. This should be familiar to everyone on the phone given your backgrounds. There are other ways that one might think about the risk or the underwriting that would go into an ex-offender, but we focused on these 5. They're familiar, but also we want to talk a little bit about some of the challenges you'd find with an ex-offender relative to someone who looks virtually indistinguishable in terms of their business. So 2 bakers, one that's an ex-offender, one that isn't. What we want to highlight is some things that may be different about each one. So, for example, credit. You might find that someone, not surprisingly, that's been incarcerated for some time might have a negative, limit, or non-existent credit history. One of the things that's less known to folks who don't work with ex-offenders is that it turns out that ex-offenders are often victims of identity theft. When someone knows that you've been incarcerated for 2 or 3 years and they have a limited bit of information about your background, when you were born, where you went to school, your mother or your father's maiden name, your mother's maiden name, they're able to, in fact, steal your identity, and you don't have the ability to know that your identity has been stolen. You don't have the ability to know that an IRS tax return has been taken out in your name. So it turns out that many ex-offenders not only have negative credit history or non-existent credit history, they may actually have been victims of identity theft. Now, there are ways of dealing with that, and certainly being incarcerated at the time that a credit product was taken out is great, but there is a process for that, and that process can be cumbersome and take time. Next, capital. We know that ex-offenders, I've already talked about cost to the state. What I haven't talked about is if they did a property crime, they may have restitution that they must pay. Some of the folks we work with, again, these restitution agreements can cut into 5 figures, which can be substantial for someone who's just trying to re-enter the job market. We also know that there may be child support payments, and an important thing about child support, which is less known, is that while someone is incarcerated, your child support debt, your child support obligation is cumulative. So if you've been incarcerated for 5 years, you still owe the entire 5-year amount. Next, we think about the capacity to pay. And one of the things to think about is that many incarcerated who may be thinking about starting a business may be working somewhere else. And if they are working somewhere else, and that's a part of how they'll actually be scored, we have to remember that many are the first hired and could be first fired. Studies show that even though it's hard to get a job, once a job is had, the ex-offender is at risk for keeping the job. Next, many ex-offenders may work in businesses that are seasonal. Since so many ex-offenders are trained in vocational trades like auto repair, like HVAC, like landscaping, there may be some seasonality to the businesses they work in, which means that in certain periods of the year, they may be relatively idle. Not surprisingly, people that have been incarcerated for some time who may even be middle income to start with may have few assets after coming out of prison. Thus, collateralizable assets that could be used against the cost of the loan will be in short supply. And then finally, character is the most squishy, the most subjective element of the 5 Cs. Let it be said that if you have a scarlet letter of a felony that you must talk about, that you must explain, that would be, in many people's eyes, non-starter revolving around the person's character. It's very difficult to disentangle the ex-offender's felony from other indicators of their character, and it would be required on those trying to lend ex-offenders to think long and hard about what other types of information could you find. Could you get reports from the counseling staff at the prison? Could you hear about the degree to which the person got in trouble or didn't? These could be ways you could deal with those questions. Next slide, please. So how do we reconcile these profiles? We'll be talking in our next seminar on November 18th about ways that you can educate, but also when thinking about education programs, and again, these could be done by partners, we'll talk a lot about what's in your control for selecting people, how you'll establish a selection criteria, how you'll set clear performance expectations, and how you'll screen for success. These are all things we currently do, and we're experts in doing that, and we'll be talking today about how one does these things. All right, so in terms of selection criteria, I'm going to turn it over to Tierney.
Hi, everyone. When Greg and I were talking about this, we were thinking in terms of reconciling those profiles, the profile of a great credit-worthy loan applicant and someone that is being just released from prison. And as Greg just went through, we find that, largely those 5 C's are going to look quite a lot different. But, we do believe that education can help assist us in and assist you in doing the work that finding those people that can be, if you will, good bets. And what we have found in our programs at Resilience Education is that the selection criteria alone of an education program can give you a really good window into sifting through people that really want and are worthy and have the desire and the motivation to succeed. And it gives you an opportunity by the ways in which the parameters you put around your selection criteria, it gives you the opportunity to sort of pre-test people for the types of expectations you have. Let me give you some examples. In our entrepreneurship program, we ask our facilities to have a couple of important criteria. One, we have a minimum education requirement. So we're seeing that before anybody gets in the door of our programs, we want to make sure that they have had a high school diploma. They have a high school diploma or a GED. Because it's an entrepreneurship program, we also ask that they have a vocational certificate. These certificates can be obtained while they're incarcerated, and many of our programs are going on with people at the end of their sentences, so they are almost at reentry. They're usually 2 to 3 years out of reentry. So these types of programs could happen also at post-release, and we are talking with some folks right now about doing that up in the D.C. area. So a minimum education criteria ensures, for instance, for us, that we have people that have a good reading skills and math skills. But as we've known and we've learned, sometimes people have been away from those types of calculations and things for quite a while. So we have a math pre-assessment that we use. We use 8th grade standards. We use curriculum here, the standards of learning that we have. We call them SOLs in Virginia. You may have them elsewhere. There's the Common Core. But these type of standards, what we do is we give them a pretest, and we just get a sense for those people that are coming in, where is everyone? Now, we don't use that particular pre-assessment as a criteria to eliminate people from the program because we actually do a math review in our program. We'll go into that next time a little more. But that pre-assessment is very important information because if someone was really frightened of that process, then they need to use those skills in business and they need to use those skills in the outside. It's important that we understand that. We look at their employment history as well, in and out of prison. When Greg was talking about the issue of court and costs of court and the types of things of child support, you have to know that people do have jobs in prison. Many people, some people are tutors, some people are working in the cafeteria. There's many different places where people are getting experience, but there's also some have a history of employment outside as well. And as we spoke about last time, we've had people who are engineers in our program. But it is important is to understand what their employment history is, and as Greg mentioned, what their recommendations are. A counselor, in our case, provides a recommendation for each of the people that are applying for our program. And in our case, we also look for someone who has been outside of having an issue within the prison, what we call infraction-free, for 6 months. Essentially and finally in our applications that we receive, there's an offender profile. We look at the crime, we see the sentence, we do look for gang affiliations, if any, and we're looking at their release date to make sure that they can actually complete the program successfully. In our case, that offender profile, when we are selecting someone, that, except for the fact that they have a release date, those other things are less important to us than the other criteria that I've mentioned here. Because one of the things that we've learned is that you may have been convicted of, a very significant crime, but you may have been spending the last sets of years trying to improve yourself, and those types of ways, the ways in which you're conducting your behavior now, we think is important to giving people a second chance. So just a little bit more about our criteria, if you could advance to the next slide, please. We also do, and keep moving into the questions. We also actually have some written questions, and you can just post those both up there. One of the first questions is, why are you interested in the program? What do you expect to learn? How do you think it's going to help you? Then we ask a series of leadership questions, describing a leadership experience, highlighting a past experience as an entrepreneur. Some people have them, and skills that they have in making. What skills do you think will make you most successful? These important essay questions for us give us a sense as to people's, are they willing to go and actually write an essay? Are they willing to take the time to fill out this, fairly dense application? And are they willing to, they have some ideas for where they want this program to take them? Finally, if you advance the next slide, you also see the final essay question, why do they think they're going to be a successful entrepreneur? And where do they think they need to develop themselves? These give us information as educators. These give us pieces of information so that we can help them. And this is, the most important thing is not only just to select people that we think are going to be most successful, but people that are motivated and that have the determination to succeed. And we find that putting some of those parameters on a program at the very beginning in that selection will essentially weed out those people that really aren't interested or maybe have a challenge of being there. We're now going to move to slide 13 and focus on one more question. I'm going to ask Colin to step in one more time. In the selection criteria we just presented, what struck you as most critical if you're thinking about selecting someone for an educational program such as the one that we created, or such as one that you think would be important to your institution in helping someone get the skills they need to be successful and to build their credit worthiness? Which selection criteria do you think would be most successful, most critical? A, math pre-assessment, B, counselor recommendation, C, those essay questions, D, the profile that I discussed, or E, education and employment. And Colin, we'll turn it to you to help us figure out what people think on this question.
Okay, and it looks, we've gotten quite a few responses. Looks fairly split pretty evenly, but I would say B and E are the ones we're seeing the highest responses for so far.
And that would be B, the counselor recommendation, and E, education and employment. And we would definitely agree that whether it's employment or those kinds of references that we use, that all of us use, are very critical because they're some form of objective, if you will. Someone that knows somebody, very important. Somebody can give us a sense of that person's motivation, that person's accomplishments in other areas. And the education and employment, yes, very important. But I just would like to say that I think that it's important to consider, what people are saying on their own as well. What isn't in that resume, if you will, what isn't in that. And yes, the counselor can say it, but sometimes if you have the opportunity for someone to write on their own, that essay question can be very helpful as well. If we'll move to slide 14 now. So when we think about our own programs, we wanted to share a few of the lessons learned that we've had. What we feel like selection does in a program and developing a successful criteria, as I mentioned before, it puts a structure around what you're trying to accomplish, but it doesn't also provide objectivity for decision making. Well, that can actually take the form of two things. One, it sets a norm for what you're expecting people to want and desire in this program and the type of profile of a well. Now, it also could set precedent. And so, when you need objectivity where, for instance, you have to say, you know what, this is not somebody that we can have in our program, then that selection criteria actually provides you some important objectivity. We found this to be the case in our programs, and sometimes that is disappointing when we are excited about someone, but most of the time we find that this is setting an important standard and a standard for success. We also find that selection can be a pre-screen for other programs. So, when we think about that prison population that we talked about very early on and the 10,000 a week that are being released, well, not everybody's going to be capable of getting an SBA loan. Not everyone is going to be capable entrepreneur in the future, and we want to find the most capable people for those positions when we are recommending them. So we're trying to find that most capable subset, and that selection criteria and selection can be a pre-screen. We also learn through their performance. In our case, we delivered 3 different programs. The entrepreneurship program, the criteria which we just discussed. We also have a financial literacy program and a business foundations program. We learn through these programs who rises to the top. And you can easily see if someone's able to go through a program, an educational program, by a capable partner that you might have out in your community, you might be able to then have time to examine that person and get feedback on the person, but also see who in those classes are rising to the top. And I can definitely say from our experience that we do see people rising to the top, and there are exciting things that you have happen in the room when you're having these discussions and you have someone who is writing a business plan and their spreadsheets are and their pro formas are the quality of performer you might find in your MBA programs. So we do have that, and those are the people that we can see being most successful, but there is another subset for which the education program is really important to give them both the tools and the confidence to succeed as well. And I think we're looking for those people too. We had one student, just for a quick example, we had one student in our women's programs who was very, very shy. She was great on paper, and she, in fact, is getting ready to be returned to her community. She was convicted of a homicide, but we really forgot that over many, 2 years of working with her. But most important for her was the issue of she was very shy and very uncomfortable speaking in front of people. Well, 2.5 years of working with her, she went back and talked to those people selected for our current programs because she really has changed the way in which she's presenting herself. She had great idea for a technology business in tech support and did a wonderful business plan. But really what we were looking at was understanding how to help her be able to both talk about her background and to be most successful in presenting herself. And she, would tell you that she was very much more successful after going through these sets of programs. And so when I think about the selection and the lessons learned, what we're saying is that selection sets the tone for what's to follow. It tells our students and it tells people that are being selected for a program that it's a competitive process, that you really have performance expectations, and there's some rigor to be delivered there, and it tells them what matters and what doesn't. So, as we think about that kind of support, it's important to think about selection criteria being something that can be on your side, that provides you time to work with people as they're moving through a process. We can go on to the next slide, 15. When I think about my own experience working with ex-offenders, one of the things that I think about is when we first go and start working with people, I really think about changing my own mindset. I had to stop thinking about that person that I mentioned to you and what her crime was and start thinking about her and her pursuits for success and her drive and her qualities for the tools that she was showing us that she was acquiring in our programs. So first was to give her the opportunity, as she looked very good on paper when it came to her recommendation and the things that you said was most important, her employment and education. But her profile, as I said, wouldn't have been somebody that we might have thought about. And I think it's really important for us to begin to think about changing our mindsets away from the offense and towards the evidence of potential success. Those are things that we have found to be most critical in our programs. Now I'm going to turn it back over to Greg to close this out with just a few more slides and discussion of selection. You can turn to slide 16, please.
So in these notions of selection, and the conversation about selection obviously ties into when you want to think about technical assistance, you want to think about bringing folks who are ready to come to speed and who we've learned can, in fact, do quite well. There's some things to think about. The first is having a math requirement. We know that the operation of a firm, we know that the completion of some of the frameworks that you teach in financial literacy, negotiations, or entrepreneurship would require some quantification and math skills. These don't have to be calculus. These don't have to be deep algorithms. But there are some needs to understand some things that would involve, for example, understanding loan amortization. So we require 8th grade math, and we test against 8th grade math. Some prison systems, by the way, have math education programs and math education testing within the prison. Our systems do. And so we're able to have a triangulated sense of math ability, both with our own testing as well as some testing that the state is doing itself. We also have, as you've heard already, a math curriculum which dovetails into that we've been doing with the assistance of some education experts, some PhDs in math education that we've developed. Writing skills. Part of the reason you ask for an essay is so someone can tell you about themselves. You can learn a lot from what someone chooses to share in an application. But we also get a sense of the person's ability to communicate on paper and likely how they might communicate on their own. There are people that are reticent to have written, and perhaps they're worried about their spelling. So writing is intimidating. But on the whole, we believe that really forcing that first step to talk about yourself is, in fact, an important one for identity, psychological well-being, and preparing them for the moments where they must talk about their interest or talk about their challenges. Finally, we have an interview process. Every person that is in our programs spends time interviewing with an individual. So in that interview, we have information. As we've talked about before, we have their scores on their math battery. We have their written application. We have their report from the counselor. But we also want to sit down and look them in the eye. We want to talk with folks and get a sense of how they tell their story. Not everyone's comfortable doing that, but that's an important part of our process. What's our goal? We want to eliminate the uncertainties that may exist behind what you might find out from someone on paper. We also want to eliminate uncertainties about things like, I'm really interested in having a business, but I'm really afraid of math. And that's a very real thing. We want to provide tools to help build strength, and we want to know where people are so that we can have the tool that best fits the skills, the knowledge, the capabilities they have. And finally, we think all these things, the math education, the negotiations education, the financial literacy education, all help close the gap to credit worthiness, which is why you're all on the phone today. I think this type of education for this population, and frankly, this type of education for populations that may not have been incarcerated at all, can't help but bring forward a better credit for all of you. Looking ahead, we are going to have our session again on the 18th. In that, we'll talk about developing content. We'll go deeper dive into those things, and how to develop partnerships between you as lenders, you as technical assistance providers, and some organizations that may be in your community. I'm going to turn it back over to Tierney to add a little flavor and color to some of the things we saw on slide 16, how we interview and selection.
Yeah, just before we close out, I was thinking about the types of things and examples that we've seen in the interview process. One, I think as Greg mentioned, it's really important to be sitting across from somebody, but those writing skills and having someone communicate to you, what business am I interested in? I had one gentleman from Virginia who had been a roofer. And we talked about his background as a roofer, and that's a very difficult job. But he said, what I really want to do is I want to have my business be a pawn shop. And we started talking through that, and, as I was sitting across from him, I said to him, that sounds like a very, very interesting idea. And I could understand how he might, want to not be, sweating it out outside and in wanting a more, desk-oriented, if you will, job. But I said to him, I just want you to reflect on the type of business that you're talking about. And, I'm not going to speak to your particular issues, and I don't know your relationships, but I would like you to reflect on the types of people that might be coming into your pawn shop, and whether or not these will be people that, there might be some people that you don't want to be associated with anymore, given, you wanting to turn over this new leaf in your life. And as you think about your business, I just want you to take a few minutes and just, as you're going through the course, just think about that. You can certainly put together that business plan, and nobody's going to stop you from putting that business together. Well, I didn't think about this particular gentleman for, a long time after. In fact, because I usually oversee the facility with our women in it, I didn't see him until I heard his presentation at his business plan, and I saw him at graduation right after that. He told me that conversation that we had during the selection process was one of the most important conversations that he had while he was incarcerated. And I was very surprised. But what it told me as he and I talked was that, he said nobody had really challenged him to think about those kinds of things that he wasn't thinking about. And he, in fact, did go on to put together a business plan, and it was more in the field that he had his skills in than it was in this area. And he said he wanted to thank me for that conversation. And I just wanted to share that with everyone because I think those are the types of things that we are talking about when we're talking about selecting for success and selecting people who we're also having a conversation with. And that selection criteria and who you're letting into that program, we had a great conversation that day. And then he went on to learn a tremendous amount about entrepreneurship. And I believe he'll be that much more successful because he was challenged and we were able to have an honest conversation and an honest discussion. And I think that, that is a really important part of closing that gap to creditworthiness, is talking to people about the realities and in a very professional and genuine way. So that's the end of our webinar, official content of our webinar. We have slide 17, as Greg showed, is looking ahead. We'll talk more about the quality, to developing quality and targeted content and looking at these relationships and partnerships that you might form. And finally, if you move to slide 18, we have contact information there where you can reach us either through our email, through our cell phones, and on our more information about resilience education on our website. Thank you so much for your attention today, and I think we're going into a Q&A right now, and so I'm going to turn it back over to Colin to help facilitate that. Thank you.
First we have is just, where can we get the first webinar in this series?
I can handle that. This is James Webb at the SBA, and anybody that needs the first webinar, feel free to send me an email at james.webb@sba.gov. For those of you that have analysts here at the Office of Economic Opportunity, you can reach out to them as well. So again, that's james.webb@sba.gov. Thank you.
Okay, and the next written question we have is, how much per ex-offender has been spent for re-entry assistance each year, or what is the percentage of assistance in relative to total spending in keeping them in prison?
So I want to defer to folks that are more versed in the justice system than we are. I can say a little bit about what we know from our work, but I suspect the Bureau of Justice Statistics will have far better data on these questions. I think the Pew Charitable Trust has a study that looks at these questions. Let me share some things that we do know. So, for example, we know that in the state of Virginia, the cost of incarceration per year runs to about $27,000 per year, per person. So we find that fascinating, given that the cost of tuition at the University of Virginia, which is the state's flagship, is actually substantially lower than $27,000 per year. So, and that cost is borne by tuition coming from the family or from the individual, and the cost of incarceration is coming from the state and from our tax dollars. The cost then, and keep in mind again that recidivism rate, which can run anything from 1/4 to 40-50%, that means that someone might come out, but within 3 years you're back to spending the $27,000 per person per year. That being said, recidivism programs are largely programs that are done educationally. And so what we're talking about then is the cost necessary to deliver, as we do, an education program for 40 or 50 people a year. And I don't need to tell everyone on the phone, those costs are substantially lower than $27,000 a year. And our estimates are that they are as low as $700-800 per year. And that's inclusive of instructional time, that's inclusive of educational materials, that's inclusive of books, travel. That's an all-in cost number. Those numbers would differ by state and by program, of course. Some programs may have additional services that would push that number up. Some might have less that would push the number down.
Just to add on what Greg is talking about, if you think about it in terms of the cost of incarceration versus just the cost per student of a elementary, secondary education, there's really very few school districts in this country where the cost of that is pushing $20,000. Most are up in under $10,000. So CNN Money did a comparison of education versus prison costs of over 40 states, and what you can see is that the cost per student to deliver a secondary education, elementary or secondary education, is vastly, it's just a fraction of that of which we're incarcerating one inmate. So I think Greg is speaking to the cost of our programming, or the cost of programming within correctional education would be a fraction of the costs that it is required to actually keep somebody in prison.
So obviously some of you on the phone are thinking, the way we've thought about this are the costs that only accrue to the time while the person is in prison relative to the cost or the benefits that might accrue to someone who returns to the job market, who pays taxes, who becomes a contributing part of society. There are some ways those costs or benefits can be quantified and then would offset significantly the $700-800 one might spend on educating an offender in a recidivism program, at least one like ours. Are there other questions?
Yes, it looks like we do have a few more written questions, and it looks like a question did come up over the phone lines as well. We can go ahead and take that one now. This is the line of Tarsha. Please go ahead.
Hi. Thank you so much for taking my call. I am driving, so if I sound kind of choppy, please forgive me. I've been listening the whole time while I'm driving, but I have been keeping my eyes on the road. But my question is like a three-part question because it's very unique. First, are you guys available for conversation with us as vendors on unique ways to benefit the returning citizens with the SBA? That's question number one. And then
So the answer is yes. In our conversations from the beginning with the SBA, our goal is to see this type of program scale, and we are excited, interested, and engaged in helping people replicate, connect, partner on programs, hopefully around the country.
Okay. And the second question is, we offer a curriculum type, online type based curriculum, and the young lady that was on the call, she mentioned something about her company being a school. Is it possible in our conversation that you guys partner with schools that do have a fiduciary that would handle finances for them so that we can offer these opportunities to the returning citizens while they're either in prison or out of prison? Is that something we can discuss? Because I don't know what the format is. I just got the email today, so I'm trying to play catch up on how this program works, and I promise when I get stationed, I'll read more on it if it's available on your website or in the slideshows that were given. But that's a major question that I have to ask because it's something unique that we're doing, and is it something? And are you all open to unique ways to approach servicing the returning citizens?
So there's two things. First of all, the next webinar, which will happen on November 18th, will go in even more detail than we have on curricular development, how we do it, and ways that we might build off relations with other organizations. But my statement remains the same. We are available for consultation, discussion, and the encouragement in your voice that you'd like to see how we can work something out. All of this is new, innovative areas. A lot of us are figuring it out. We have some experience. We have 5 years of experience. But that doesn't mean that there is only one model, and we are quite open to ideas that help us extend, especially if those ideas have us partner with someone who's already on the ground in some other place.
Okay. And then the last thing was in the email that I saw on my phone, it had a date of, like a deadline date of November the 15th, but you're doing a presentation on the 18th. So do we miss the deadline to fill out the grant proposal, or am I misunderstanding something?
I think that's a question that our friends at the SBA should handle, but let me, as I turn it over, let me be clear. We are very interested in ongoing discussions with anyone who might be interested on how we might grow and extend these programs, and there is no drop-dead date. But I'll turn your question back over to the SBA.
Okay, perfect.
Let me jump in. This is, again, James Webb at the SBA. In regards to the grant announcement, if you give us a call here, we'll go over that. It's not necessarily an OEO, Office of Economic Opportunity grant announcement, but if you give us a call, we'll be glad to help you. Again, we're going to be having that next webinar on November 18th. It's never too late to come to an OEO webinar.
Okay. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you as well. Are there other questions?
Yes, it looks like we have quite a few more written questions now. The next one we have is, as a microlender, am I allowed to ask what the offense was specifically?
So again, that's a policy-related question, but I'm gonna say that in our programs, we do have, again, what we call the question. The question is not only that you're a felon, but what your felony is. We talk with our folks about being prepared for that question and knowing that that will be an area of uncertainty for anyone you might work with, be they a lender, be they someone that might hire you, be they someone who might hire you as a supplier to them or a service provider. And so our strong encouragement is that people become comfortable with telling their story, and that if they really are at a place in their lives where they have really thought about, contemplated the cost of what they've done, then talking about something in a past tense way is very different from talking about something that currently defines you. And we think that's an important part of the message we want to send. Now, the policy-related question on whether you can, that I'm going to turn that back to the SBA.
And I'll jump in on that. Absolutely, you're allowed to ask, and pretty much the general rule in all mission lending is full disclosure. So you're going to want to be able to develop that character analysis that you do in microlending, just like Greg and Tierney mentioned, character in determining the population in which they're going to teach to within the prison system. So character analysis is going to require full disclosure, and then at that point, you need to make an assessment. So the policy is absolutely ask.
Are there more questions?
Yes, the next question we have is, can an ex-offender with 5 felonies be eligible for this program? He's been off parole since 2008.
So again, I think this is more on the side of the SBA, but our thought would be we run into ex-offenders that have been a part of the revolving door. I think the conversation that we tend to have is, what have they learned from their past experiences, and why would this time be different? What we hear is a range of things. Sometimes the conversation is about, in the past experience, they had real challenges getting a legitimate job. Sometimes we hear that individuals find that when they returned, they landed with the wrong people. Most importantly, what we also hear, and this is an interesting thing, we hear from parents. Many of the ex-offenders we work with have children. Some have not seen their children for years. And we often hear the reason this time is different is because there's more at stake for me personally. That this is the one time in my life when I can be the parent I hoped I might be. I can tell you that you will run into ex-offenders who have more than one stint and more than one felony. I think, again, the conversation you have with them, the interview, the discussion you have about why they've had felonies and how they've changed becomes critical. Again, I'll turn the policy-related question back over to our friends at the SBA.
Thank you, Greg. And, the policy on that is if they're off parole, they're not only eligible for microloan, but a variety of SBA products if they're off parole. They still have to do a 912 background check, and there may be other issues that could prevent them from possibly being eligible for an SBA loan, but off parole, they're eligible. The idea of the microloan program and being able to lend to this population is to address the very thing that Greg and Tierney have been talking about, which is recidivism, and that means that it's very often you're going to see a situation where you might have somebody that has multiple stints, like Greg said. We're hoping that through the markers or pointers they gave in educating the prison population, that we can take a portion of them and end and close that revolving door and put them on the side of entrepreneurship or even being a better employee, as it's been pointed out in other webinar by Greg, that some of the people aren't necessarily going to be day one entrepreneurs, but they'll be day one better employees and future entrepreneurs. So it's about opportunity, and opportunity open to people with 5 or 10. Again, you have to do the character analysis. There is going to be situations and some crimes that will not be acceptable, and those are going to be part of your full analysis when you take a look at the situation on whole. All right. Any more questions? Back to you guys.
Okay. The next question we have is, what types of business opportunities are male ex-offenders best suited to pursue? Does your training program provide specific skills training for these anticipated business opportunities?
So our program does do some level of customized education. We provide a basic backbone of business content that then we do add both advising but also some level of customization. However, one of the things that's important to draw the listeners back to is that we also have an interest in the degree to which the ex-offender has already been in a vocational educational program. So these programs range substantially. So, for example, there are vocational educational programs that are in the prisons we work in that certainly include things like auto repair and certainly include things like HVAC, as I've mentioned, a host of welding and or construction trades. But I should also let the callers or the folks on the webinar know that our vocational educational training at our facilities includes things like Braille translation, and there are a set of individuals who have been trained in how to translate books into Braille. There are also folks in our facilities that have learned how to do ophthalmic grinding, that is grinding of lenses for the ophthalmology trade. We have individuals who have learned how to do training for service dogs. And so these types of vocational programs are going to differ and certainly food service and cosmetology as well. I don't want to leave those out. Those are both part of our facilities as well. If you think about it as listeners, all of the ones I've mentioned lend themselves to owning your own small firm. And so what we find is that someone who's been well trained in food service, there's a certification called ServSafe. Folks have been ServSafe certified. They already know a lot about food. What they don't know a lot about is thinking about how they get a loan, thinking about break-even analysis that they might make on a purchase. They've not thought a lot about or have a lot of knowledge on understanding how they might cost their inventory or how they might depreciate an item. And so our finding is that What we do is augment an already important technical basis that will likely have come through the vocational education programs that they may have been exposed to. I also think it's important to mention, and Tierney's already done this, the ex-offender population, while there are skews in education and while there are skews in income, we have had ex-offenders that certainly would surprise folks. We have had folks with legal degrees, folks who have been real estate agents, folks who have been computer technical folks who know how to do CAD/CAM. We've had folks with engineering degrees. I don't want the listeners to not expect that some people in the ex-offender population that they come across might be quite educated and might have degrees and backgrounds that are professional in ways that lend themselves very quickly to work.
Will Community Advantage be able to lend to those on parole?
Again, I think this SBA?
Yeah, I'll take it, Greg. Sorry. No, Community Advantage cannot lend to people on parole. And to also clarify a point, not every offender is going to be eligible to operate in there. If they were convicted of fraud or a crime of sexual nature, they would still remain ineligible, just to clarify that point. Community Advantage, again, you're not eligible to do a CA loan to somebody currently on parole. However, again, the microloan is there hopefully to bridge that gap. Back to you, Greg, and any other questions. Thank you.
Okay, next question we have is, will SBA design a revolving loan fund using the money that would have spent to keep an ex-offender in prison?
I'll take that one. We currently have no plans to have a microloan revolving fund at this time.
Greg is going to add as well, though. I think there's lots of discussion going on nationally about models that would take the view, some of these are some of the notions of social impact bonds, and it could be that someone develops a social impact bond thought process which leads to a revolving loan fund or a CDFI, Community Development Financial Institution. Well, these could be run through a Community Development Financial Institution, and and in fact I've done a lot of work with folks in that industry. I think the caller or the individual asking the question is talking about something that's an innovation that could be, but presently doesn't exist. Is there another question?
At the moment, I am not seeing any additional questions.
Well, with that being the case, we don't want to overwhelm. We don't want to run out our welcome. We want to thank all of you for your time and your interest in the topic. We want to thank you for the great questions we received. If there are questions that come up after the fact, please email us. Send us a note at Resilience Education, which is the name of the nonprofit organization we're a part of. We'd love to hear from you. Without a doubt, this is a major opportunity area for our nation, for communities within our nation, and we believe that the work that we're doing is important and your interest is critical. So thanks very much.
And thank you very much, Dr. Fairchild and Dr. Fairchild. To wrap up quickly, clearly the word opportunity has been brought up again. The first webinar was opening the door and talking about the opportunity, and in this webinar we talked a lot about character, and for the mission lenders, some of the markers and pointers you may need to address that, but that's nothing new to our mission lenders, for often character analysis is sometimes one of the greater weights of deciding to make that loan. Again, anybody that didn't get the slides or has additional questions, the last slide there is the contact for the Fairchilds. And again, I'm James Webb, also known as Chris, but you can get hold of me at james.webb with 2 B's at sba.gov. My phone number is 202-619-0628. And if you have any questions, feel free to contact me. And to clarify once again, on November 18th will be the 3rd part of this webinar series. It is never too late to attend, so mark your calendars. Tell everybody you know. We are really opening the door here into a new market that can be a great, as we've used the word, opportunity for not just reentry population, but to mission lenders. So thanks again for everybody in your time, and thanks again to both Tierney Fairchild and Gregory Fairchild for giving us your time and education on this subject. Thank you.